Morning everyone, it's 5 to 11. We're going to get started in a few minutes, so make sure you've got your water, make sure you've got your pen and paper ready, make sure you're all ready to go for lesson 6, where we're looking at technical accuracy and proofreading, which I know doesn't sound the most thrilling lesson, but is actually one of the areas where people can gain marks really effectively, but it's also somewhere where you can lose, well, not necessarily lose marks, but stop yourself from getting marks. So yeah, 5 minutes time. The seagulls are going mad outside. I don't know what's going on, but we're going to be starting in a couple of minutes. I look forward to seeing you then. Grab yourselves a drink, grab yourself a pen. So yeah, just another couple of minutes and then we're going to make a start. I've got my timer set up. I know I say that every time and every time I run over, but I'm hoping that today I might actually hit the 45 minutes that I'm aiming for. I have done it when I've practiced, so fingers crossed it'll be sorted. We're going to run through this technical accuracy. I think before we get started, it's probably worth noting that the quality of written communication, or what we call QWC marks, are not just for English exams, but they're also in things like geography and science and history, and a lot of the other GCSEs you'll be doing. And so it is an area that's really, really worth focusing on if it's something that doesn't come naturally to you, if it's something you have to work at. But I'll be going through a number of strategies to give you a hand with various bits and pieces. So hopefully this will be useful not just for English, but for all of them. So just one more minute and then we can make sure that we're all sorted. So make sure you've got your pen, make sure you've got your drink, make sure you've got some paper. There's quite a lot of little activities in this one today. Make sure you can see your screen well. And we should be good to go. This is the last one of this series. I really hope you've enjoyed them. It'd be really useful to have some feedback on how you found the series, because this is something we want to make more of, hopefully in the future, to support people learning, and it would be useful to know what sort of things you found helpful, what sort of things you could do with more of, what sort of things we could change. It would be really great. So yeah, just one more minute. Make sure you're ready and we'll start. Right, okay, it's 11 o'clock by my watch, so we're going to make a start. Good morning and welcome to lesson 6 of the English language live lesson series from Pearson. Today we are looking at technical accuracy, proofreading, editing, all those sorts of elements that are really important for every aspect of your exam, whether it's the writing or reading, whether it's literature or language. And as I said a minute ago, it's also really useful for your other subjects as well, because quality of written communication, accuracy, things like that are assessed across the board in different subjects. And so it's an area that's definitely worth focusing on if it's something that you find difficult. So just a reminder, I am Rebecca White. I'm hosting the session today. I'm head of English. I've been teaching for years. And my aim today is help you not only improve the technical accuracy of your writing, but also really think about making it effective, because using punctuation for effect is one of the criteria for your high level marks. You're going to need a pen and paper today. You might find a dictionary useful, depends on how you get on with it. But we are looking at really considering punctuation, grammar, spelling, paragraphing, all those little bits of English today that are often the area that people sort of neglect or forget about. So that's what we're going to be going over today. Just a reminder about the community rules in terms of safeguarding. We do take it very seriously. We will take any action that we seem appropriate if needed. We haven't had any problems over the last few weeks. I can't imagine we're going to have any issues now. But I would just like to make sure that you're aware of that. Right, our 5 key things there, and this is why you proofread. You'll notice I haven't changed my title on here. So I'm just going to do that now. And this is why proofreading is such an important skill, because what will happen is when you're reading something really quickly, your brain will often fill in the gaps that you haven't corrected or you haven't edited. And so you can see there that that was quite a big glaring error. Now, I've looked at this PowerPoint a number of times and I hadn't spotted it because it's something that is sort of, I've almost tuned it out. I almost don't notice it. I guess it's the same way as if in your house, if you've got a fridge that buzzes, you probably don't notice the buzzing fridge, but if someone comes to your house and they've never seen it before, they go, oh my goodness, your fridge is buzzing, and then you'll suddenly notice it again. And that's why proofreading is such a crucial element and is actually quite a high level skill to get right. And so you can see there the need to make sure that you are working on those skills. So we're looking at technical accuracy today. The 5 things that we're going to be looking at are punctuation, both for accuracy and effect. We're going to be looking at sentence variation. We're going to be looking at spelling and vocabulary. We're going to be looking at paragraphing, and we're going to be looking at proofreading and editing. Okay, so these are the 5 key areas that we're going through. Now, obviously, when we talk about proofreading and editing in an exam is very different than for classwork or homework when you don't have the same time constraints. So we're going to kind of look at strategies that will help you in the exam when you don't have the time to walk away and sort of come back to it. Okay, so how this works. Any task written in blue is something that you do now. So remember, it's a blue you do. I want you to think about any element where you see blue. If you need more time, you can just hit pause and you can just have a few extra seconds to go back. But most of the time, I'll give you about sort of 30 seconds to a minute. Any task in purple is designed to be more of an extension task. So these are tasks that are more challenging and you may want to revisit after the lesson. They're going to take a little bit more time. And obviously we don't want to sit around in silence for 10 minutes waiting for people to write because that's not a good use of time at the moment. So this is something I highly recommend revisiting. And there's lots of purple tasks on the other 5 lessons that we've done alongside this one. That if you've got time to practice will stand you in really good stead for your exams next year. So any key terms will be written in red. There'll be a glossary at the end. There's not a very big glossary on today's one. It's quite short because we've got the huge glossaries from the other lessons. So hopefully you will notice that some of the terms that keep coming up in the lessons you'll now feel more familiar with. So we're going to look at oh, sorry, I forgot you to do your task. I didn't give you any time for that one. So 30 seconds to write down a list of all the different forms of punctuation you can think of. So I'm just going to give you 30 seconds to write down a list of all the different forms of punctuation you can think of. 30 seconds, off you go. Okay, so hopefully you've got a nice long list there of various different forms of punctuation, full stops, capital letters, commas, all that sort of thing. So in terms of punctuation for accuracy and effect, these are the 12 elements that I'll be looking at today, okay? So we're looking at 2 key areas, how to use punctuation accurately and how to use it for effect. And like I said, using it accurately is kind of a required skill across all sort of levels of the mark scheme, but being able to use it for effect is definitely something that will gain you more marks. It's awarded much more heavily at the top end. And so it's about really thinking about not just using them because they're right, but using them because they have a particular effect on the reader. In the same way as choosing language does. You know, yes, it's all important to use the right word for something, but if you can choose a word that's got good connotations, that's going to create an emotion in your reader, that's going to be much more effective. So quick blue task here. You're going to look at the forms of punctuation below. And I just want you to think about how you would rate your confidence on using those forms of punctuation accurately. So if you're absolutely 100% confident, you know how to use a full stop, you use it correctly all the time, you know exactly where they go, you can give that the top scale, whether you're going to do it 1 out of 5 or 1 out of 10, or whether you're going to do it red, amber, green, or smiley face, miserable face, whichever rank form you want to use. Just rate your confidence for each of those 12. Now I'm going to give you about sort of 30 seconds for that, just a couple of seconds per piece. And just think about how confident are you in terms of using those pieces of punctuation right at this moment. Okay, 30 seconds, off you go. Okay. So some of you might be really confident with some of those, some of you might be sort of semi-confident, some of you might not be confident at all. I'm hoping that by the time we finish this lesson, that those feelings of confidence are much higher than they are now, and you feel a bit more secure in how to use them and how to use them for effect. So we're going to start off with the basics. We're going to start off with capital letters and full stops. Now I can already kind of hear people moaning and rolling their eyes here, because this happens in my classroom all the time. When I start talking about capital letters and full stops, everyone's like, yeah, we know how it works, we've got them. I cannot tell you how many exam papers I've marked where people have missed capital letters, missed full stops. I've even marked exam papers from, you know, really clearly quite able students, and the very first word on the very first line doesn't have a capital letter because they've just forgotten, or they're just writing so quickly it hasn't really registered. And so it's really important that you get into good habits. Now, again, going with some of my students, I've had students say, oh yeah, miss, but I'll check at the end and I'll do it then. That's not really a strategy you want. What you want is to try and make it so that your capital letters and your full stops are so instinctive that you don't really have to think about it. Some of you in a couple of years will be starting to do driving lessons and things like that. And from when I learned, you know, when I started learning to drive, I had to think about everything, you know, and it made it a very stressful experience. I had to keep thinking, right, mirror, signal, maneuver, I've got to push the clutch down, I've got to change gear, I've got to do this. Everything was in my brain. I had to really think about it. Now, having been driving for longer than I want to admit, it's almost instinctive. I don't have to think about some of those elements, and it means that I can focus on the road much better, because I'm not having to worry about, oh, how do I change gear again? Where is third gear? I don't have to think about those things. And you want that with the way that you write. You know, you want these basics to be things you don't really have to think about, that they just come naturally. So for capital letters, you need capital letters at the start of sentences. You need them for proper nouns, so for the names of people and places. The days of the week and months of the year also start with capital letters, as do festivals such as Christmas, Diwali and Eid. Okay, so those are all proper nouns. They all need capital letters. You need it for the start of names of languages and nationalities, so French, German, Tamil, Italian, Urdu, Chinese. Those all need capital letters. And you also always need it for I when you're talking about yourself. So at 9 o'clock, I walked home. That is always a capital letter. And I think this is the one that people most often forget, because when we text or type, that often autocorrects for us. And so it's not something we have to think about particularly. But when you're handwriting, you really need to make sure that you are consciously putting that capital I. For your full stops, always at the end of the sentence, and it should always be followed by a capital letter. Okay, so those are kind of the rules on that one. And it's really important that you think about going back through and checking that all your sentences end with capital letters, particularly in dialogue. What I tend to find is people write dialogue, and because they've put the speech marks at the end, they sort of forget about the full stop as well. So make sure that you've got those sorted. Right, have a look at this text. This is a blue task. Okay, so this is one that you're going to do. I'm going to give you a minute for this. I just want you, I'll read it out, so the minute will start when I start reading. I'll read it out, and I just want you to think about where the capital letters and full stops should go. Just see if you can spot where they should be, okay? Susan wondered if she could avoid her mum and just sneak out to school. She really didn't want to start her day answering loads of questions. Mum, she called, I've got to be in school early because of my Spanish test. I'll see you later. All right, Susan, have you got your lunch? Yeah. Right, I'll just give you about another 30 seconds just to have a look to see where the full stop's capital letter should be. Okay, well, hopefully you spotted them all. So you can see there, obviously, Susan needs a capital letter because it's her name. I've put a full stop after the first sort of main clause, compound sentence there with Susan wondered if she could avoid her mum and just sneak out to school. Full stop there. She really didn't want to start her day answering those questions. What you've got there are two sort of separate ideas that are into those different sentences. Mum, capital letter because it's the start of a sentence, full stop after that bit, and then I've got to be in school early. And again, that sort of split sentence around the dialogue punctuation is important. Spanish, capital S, capital I, because it's the start of a sentence, but also because it's, that first person pronoun. And then I've put a full stop between, all right, Susan, have you got your lunch? Because that for me is sort of two separate clauses, but I can appreciate some people might have stuck a comma there instead. Okay, so just have a look, see if you spotted them all, see how confident you were with that, and make sure you've got them right. Now, the next bit we're looking at is commas. Now, there are loads of different ways to use commas, and therefore there's quite a lot of ways that people can get them wrong and people can use them incorrectly. So the way that you want to use a comma is either to separate items in a list. So I need eggs, sugar, and flour. You can separate direct speech from the rest of a sentence. I will be there, commas, close speech marks, she said. And you can see there that that little comma in between the there and the she said is really important, and that's something that lots of people forget. You might want to use it to create an embedded clause. So my best friend, who lived just around the corner, was always willing to listen. Now that who lived just around the corner, I could rip that bit out. It doesn't need to be there. My best friend was always willing to listen. It makes sense on its own. But I've put that embedded clause in as a way to add that additional information. And the commas help to separate it. You might use it to follow a coordinating conjunction or to precede a coordinating conjunction that joins two clauses together. So motorways in Britain are usually toll free to use, but the M6 near Birmingham does not charge toll. Does charge toll. So again, that comma there is a way of separating those two clauses. Or you might want to use it after an adverbial phrase at the start of a sentence. So after lunch, Sue started reading her new book. Now, the way to remember how to use that is if you put that clause or that phrase at the end of the sentence. So Sue started reading her new book after lunch. You wouldn't need a comma then. But by moving the after lunch to the beginning, you need a comma after it. So just have a look at this bit. We're going to do the same as we did before. I'll read it out and then give you sort of 30 seconds with it afterwards. I want you to think about where should the commas go in this piece. So Bob was furious. It had been 3 hours and he still didn't have the things he needed to complete the job. He'd sent his son out for some nails, a hammer and a saw, but the boy had returned with nothing. After this failure, Bob asked his wife Susan to get the items from the DIY store. She told him she was too busy. I just need some nails, begged Bob. His arms were aching from holding up the broken shelf, and he longed for a way to fix it so he could finally go to the loo. Okay, so just going to give you 30 seconds, just have a look at that and think about where you would put the commas. Okay, so we've got the items in the list, nails, a hammer, a saw, and also we've got it preceding that coordinated conjunction with the but. Now, the after this failure bit, you could do Bob asked his wife after this failure. That's the adverbial phrase that you're then moving to the beginning, so it needs a comma. His wife, Susan, the name Susan is in an embedded clause there because, again, that's additional information. He asked his wife to get the items from the DIY store, would still make sense, but we've given that additional information of Susan, and so that's why it becomes in the embedded clause with the commas. And then we've got the comma after the direct speech with I just need some nails, beg Bob. Okay, so hopefully you can see why they should be there. Okay, so question marks, really straightforward. Question marks indicate when a question is used. Now, obviously, some of them are quite straightforward questions. So starting with those typical question words, the how, what, where, when, why, where are we going, when we'll get there, why are we driving so slowly, those sorts of things. Sometimes it'll be a question that starts with a variation of the verb to be, to do, or to have. So is there anything I can help you with? Do you like chicken? Have you eaten anything today? Are you going out on Friday? You know, those sorts of words can start a sentence. But also, writers sometimes use question marks as a way of reflecting the intonation of the speaker, because when we ask a question in speech, we don't necessarily start with those question words. So, for example, the one that I've got here, John couldn't believe it. Mike really did that, he gasped. You know, he's questioning that. That? Oh my goodness. You know, the tone is there of that questioning intonation. And so sometimes you can play around with that and make sure that you're using question marks as a way of reflecting the tone of speech as well as reflecting the actual function of the sentence. So it's worth having a think about those different styles. And the same way with exclamation marks. You know, exclamation marks are really useful for tone, but they should only really be used sparingly and when you're trying to achieve a specific effect, and you should only really use one at a time. And I know the temptation is when you're sort of trying to show excitement to use 2 or 3 or 4 as a way of showing the energy of your speaker. But actually, you don't really want to do that. You do want to limit it to one at a time because that's the more accurate way of doing it. And obviously in the exam, it's important that you're aiming for that accuracy as well as the effect. So you can use it to show someone shouting loudly. So help, yelled, Brian yelled. You know, the exclamation mark there is showing the volume of it. You can do it to show emphasis. It was the best day ever. But again, you want to really think about when you're using that so that you're not constantly using them and it loses the effect. If you think about it, if you have someone who's completely overexcited about everything, eventually it just becomes irritating. You know, they're like, oh my goodness, I turned the kettle on and then I had a cup of tea and then I walked over here and, you know, you're just like, oh, whatever, you are not interested anymore. And that's the same effect as if you overuse exclamation marks in your writing. Okay, so make sure you're using them carefully. So have a look at this little bit of text here from he was stuck. I want you to think about, you're only allowed to place one question mark and one exclamation mark in the paragraph. I want you to think about where you would put them, okay? So he was stuck. There was no doubt in his mind that he was thoroughly, completely and utterly stuck. What a stupid thing to have happened. How could he have let himself get into this situation? What an idiot. Right, I want you to just have a look at that. Just give you 20 seconds. You're only allowed one question mark and one exclamation mark. Where would you put them? Okay, 20 seconds, off you go. Okay, so for the question mark, it's quite straightforward. It's the how could he have let himself get into this situation? Okay, he's questioning the situation, he's questioning what you've done. But you've got a choice for the place of an exclamation mark. Either what a stupid thing to have happened or what an idiot. Think about where you put it. Think about the different effect that has. You know, what a stupid thing to have happened. That suggests he's really irritated about the thing. But if you put it on one idiot, that suggests he's really cross with himself. And so it changes where his anger is. So yeah, have a think about where you put it and why. Because analysing punctuation could be something that is worth considering for your reading section of your exam as well as your writing section. Okay, so we're going to look at punctuating dialogue now. Now, obviously, you can see we've got boxes appearing. Using dialogue can be an effective way to increase your range of punctuation. It can help create character, but it's also an area where students really struggle to punctuate accurately. And often this is an area where we see people hinder themselves in terms of marks. So some of you may have been recommended by your teachers to avoid it because it is a tricky area, particularly when you're writing at pace and exam conditions. So obviously speech marks go around what has been said, not who is saying it. That's one error I often see it. So I've seen in exams where people would put help shouted Sam and then the closed speech mark comes around Sam. You do it just around the bits that are being said. The punctuation that's linked to what is being said is placed inside the speech marks. So you can see the question mark and the exclamation marks there are inside the speech marks because they show the tone of what is being said. And so it's important they stay with what's being said. Every time somebody new speaks, you need a new line, okay, particularly in a conversation like that. And this is another area where teachers are sometimes reluctant for students to get carried away with dialogue because otherwise it reads like a play script, and that often damages the flow of the narrative. So you don't want to have too long a conversation. And then if no other punctuation is needed, so if you don't need an exclamation mark or a question mark, then don't forget you need the comma to separate the direct speech from the rest of the sentence. So I've fallen off the ladder, comma, close speech mark, Sam replied. Okay, so it's really important you're kind of looking at those elements. And the more you read text, the more you'll see how punctuation is, how dialogue is punctuated, so you can use it more effectively. And again, that's another benefit of reading extensively to help improve your writing. So, as I've said, it is a risky business, writing dialogue. You know, it's quite tricky. There's lots of errors that can occur, but it can be a really useful tool in developing your character in quite an efficient way. And remember, we haven't got an awful lot of time in that exam to write those stories, and so it's really important that we're taking advantage of every shortcut we can. So I've got a single line of dialogue here, and I just want you to think about what information do you get about the character just from that single line of dialogue, okay? You really expect me to eat that? Like, really? You're having a laugh? Just have a think for 20 seconds. What do you learn about this character just from that single line of dialogue? Well, hopefully you've kind of got a bit of an idea about something about their age. If, you know, I don't think my mum would necessarily speak like this. My grandmother certainly wouldn't. This is something that the speaker feels young. They are disgusted by something. They're potentially a bit fussy. They're possibly a bit rude. You know, you're having a laugh. I'm not eating that. You've got this sort of aggression that kind of comes with them. So there's someone who's a bit forthright. And you've got quite a lot of information without anything else, with no description, no padding, no speech tags, nothing. What you've got there is just the dialogue, and suddenly you're bringing together this character. So sometimes it can really be worth the risk. Ellipsis is quite an interesting one. Ellipsis serves two main functions. The first one is where you can omit words from a quotation. This is really useful in your English literature exams for long quotations. What I would say is if you're going to use ellipsis, you want the quotation that's left to still make sense as a sentence, and you want to make sure you haven't cut out anything that affects the meaning. And so I've seen examples before where people have cut out words, you know, it was horrifically and shockingly poor. People have put shockingly just as the word or something like that, and then said this is really exciting, but obviously it's not. They're saying it's really bad. And so you've got to think about making sure that you don't cut anything that's going to affect the context. So here you can see, you know, it was undoubtedly the single most ridiculous, mindless and stupid thing I'd ever done, becomes it was stupid. That's fine because the meaning is still the same, but also the sentence is still, you know, it still reads well. So you can use the ellipsis there. You might want to use it in speech to show a pause. And remember, when we're writing direct speech, sometimes we want to create the character's voice. And we often pause, we often stumble when we speak. And so this example here, I stuttered and stumbled over my words. Okay. And then you've got that sort of element there of somebody who's really struggling to speak, and you've created that tone quite effectively. So have a look at this sentence or this sort of little extract. I just want you to think about what the effect the ellipsis has on the reader. Okay, it looks like a dragon. That was the only word for it. The massive lizard that Cressida had spotted was the size of a mythical beast. All right, just have a think about the effect that has. Just 10 seconds. Okay, so hopefully what you can see there is that the character is really struggling for words, is stammering, is shocked, is confused by what they've seen, is almost kind of disbelieving in their tone. And so what you get is this idea that this event is quite exciting and quite shocking. Okay? Right. We're going to look at this bit now. I'm going to apologise. My next door neighbour has got their washing machine on and I can feel it through the wall. So I do apologise if you can hear it. Right. For a purple task, so this is a do later task. I want you to think about two friends meeting for coffee. So one person has the perfect cup of coffee and the other person's tastes absolutely vile. I want you to write the conversation between them as a way of practicing using dialogue punctuation accurately, but also in terms of thinking about where could you pad out some of the descriptive elements so you don't end up with just sort of like a play script, you actually end up with a bit of a narrative. Okay, so that's a do later task, but it's definitely worth practicing and really think about how are you going to convey one character's disgust and one character's excitement. What could be the potential conflict around this sort of meeting? You know, one of them might want to move on, one of them might want to stay. Just have a think, okay? So that's a do later task, hence why it's in purple. Right, apostrophes. This is something that people really struggle with. And one of the things I really love about apostrophes is there is actually an apostrophe preservation society. Lots of people who go around trying to protect the apostrophe because it's used so badly. And I know that that's a really English teacher sort of thing, but I find that really funny. But apostrophes have the following uses. You show omission, okay? So when letters are omitted, when they're cut out. So do not becomes don't, is not becomes isn't. You need the apostrophe there to show that the O is missing. To show possession, now in a singular situation, if you're going to show that something belongs to someone, it's apostrophe then S. So John's bag. So John apostrophe S bag. The dog's paws. Dog apostrophe S paws. Okay, the paws belong to the dog, the bag belongs to John, so that's apostrophe S when it's singular. If the possession is plural, so for example, kittens is plural, this is the bed that belongs to multiple kittens, the apostrophe goes after the S. Okay, so the kitten's bed means the bed that belongs to two or more kittens. To show possession with words ending in S, okay, so the phone of the boss, it will usually be written by boss apostrophe S. Now, sometimes you might see it with just the apostrophe. That's a bit of a stylistic choice. But if the word refers to more than one thing or person, it will usually be written like that. So the bosses meeting was the meeting of the many bosses. Okay, that's not just one boss, that's multiple bosses. Hence why it's plural and hence you've got the apostrophe there. Okay. So you might want to have a think about those and just really make sure that you're using them accurately. If apostrophes is something you know you miss, it's worth thinking about that when you proofread. So have a look at this. There's lots of apostrophe errors in this section. Okay, I'm going to read it to you and then give you 30 seconds. I just want you to see if you can spot the errors and think about how you would correct them. Okay, so the Joneses' dog had broken out of the back gate and was running all over Mr. Smith's flowers. He was furious. "Can't you keep that dog under control?" he yelled from his front door as he watched his flowers' roots being destroyed by the frantic digging of the energetic puppy. So just have a look. How would you correct it? Well, where are the errors and how would you correct it? Just going to give you 30 seconds. Obviously, if you need more time, just hit pause and you can start again in a minute. So just have a look. How would you correct them? Okay. So the first line is the dog that belongs to the family of Joneses. Okay, so that's a word that ends in an S, so it should just be an apostrophe after the S, the dog that belongs to the family. You can see that the contracted version of can't is there with so contracted version of it cannot, so you need the apostrophe there because it's showing omission. With Mr. Smith's flowers, we've got two errors there. The first one is the flowers belong to Mr. Smith. So his surname is a sort of singular, so the apostrophe needs to be the other side of the S. And his flowers there are a plural. They don't belong to anybody. Well, they belong to him, but they don't need an apostrophe because it's just a plural. So, for example, if you said, I saw 9 dogs, you don't need an apostrophe there because that's just a plural. In the second example of flowers, though, because it's talking about the roots that belong to the multiple flowers, you'd need the apostrophe on the other side of the S. So hopefully you can see where those errors are and how they needed to be corrected. Okay? So, colons and semicolons. Now, these are often considered quite sophisticated pieces of punctuation. And they are quite useful in a text, but you don't want to use too many of them, sort of 1 or 2. And the reason I've got an image of a diamond ring down there is for me, it's like a really impressive piece of jewellery. If you can use these well, they're like a really impressive piece of jewellery. However, if you had the whole lot on, if you had a tiara and 50 earrings and loads of rings and 20 necklaces and toe rings galore and all the rest of it, eventually you just look kind of ridiculous. It would lose the classy effect of it, if you like. And so for me, these are kind of the pinnacle of punctuation, but you don't want to use too many. So a colon can be used to introduce a list, an example, or a thing. So for example, to make a cake, you need eggs, flour, butter, and sugar. So the colon there is introducing the list of things you need. Or I could just make out what it said beneath the dust, poison. It's almost like a dramatic introduction. And I think that is one of the ways that you can use it in your creative writing and just get kind of used to practicing that structure. A semicolon is usually used to join 2 clauses. It could be separate sentences, often show the ideas are connected to each other. So Jamal was tired, the baby had kept him awake all night. You've got the semicolon there is almost being used like because. So Jamal was tired because the baby had kept him awake all night. You're using it there to connect the 2 ideas. Or Carol couldn't believe Sam had served her cottage pie. He knew she was a vegetarian. Again, it's using that semicolon to connect the 2 ideas. The reason that Carol can't believe Sam did that is because he knew she was vegetarian. And so those 2 ideas are really heavily connected. As part of your revision, I would really recommend practicing some sentences that you can use colons and semicolons that you can then recreate in your writing. And again, going back to that driving analogy that we used at the start of the lesson, it's those things that you do kind of over and over again that become very natural. So my one that I tend to use, it was the one person I couldn't wait to see, I dreaded seeing, I never wanted to see again, Mr. So-and-so, Lucy, whatever. You kind of use the names after the colon. And it was time to take action, I had to move now. You can almost use that semicolon there to connect the ideas. But have a practice at using them so that you become really confident with them. Dashes and brackets are used to create parenthetical clauses. Okay, so embedded clauses, adding more information. For me, brackets tend to make something really stand out. So the majority of the club's supporters, a whopping 85%, signed the petition to keep the stadium open. And it's almost like shouting that line to someone. Whereas with brackets, it's more like a whisper, it's more like an aside. So the club's supporters, with the exception of 1 or 2 absent members, signed the petition to keep the stadium open. And so in terms of the effect that you want from those parenthetical clauses, from those embedded clauses, just have a think about what are you trying to do? Are you trying to make it seem really punchy, or are you trying to make it seem like a bit more of a conversational aside with your reader? And then make the choice based on there. But again, you don't want to use loads of these. This is something you want to do subtly. So we're going to have a look at these 2 sentences. I just want you to think about the tone and the change in tone that comes across. So Uncle Jimmy, a former detective, though he never told anyone, looked at her with a cold and calculating eye. It was a sharp pain, like ripping tape off a hairy leg, and she winced visibly. Okay, just have a think about the tone that's changed there. Just going to give you about 15 seconds. Okay. So hopefully you can see what I was saying about that kind of one being like a whispered aside and one being quite dramatic. And you can hopefully see that in the tone there. Right. once you've got kind of your punctuation sorted, you really need to think about your sentence variation. Now, obviously, when you use full stops for effect, you're using it to create different types of sentence. And those are the 4 types of sentence that we've looked at in previous lessons. The minor sentence, simple sentence, compound sentence, and complex sentence. And so what you want in your writing, whether you're doing your essay writing for English literature or your reading section or your non-fiction or fiction writing, you want to use a range of sentences. And so it's important that you're confident with how to structure those 4 types. So you can see here, this is a blue task. I want you to have a think about the effect of having a variety of sentences in a single paragraph. So Jim walked out the door. He pulled his blazer tightly around him and began to walk towards Jared's house. Just in case his mum happened to look out the window, he walked a little quicker than normal and tried to think about how he was going to get his coat back from Michaela, his brand new coat. Okay, now we've got quite a lot of different sentences. Well, we've got the 4 main types in there. And what you end up with is a very different pace. And what I tried to do, well, I'll give you a second just to have a think about what I've tried to do. Particularly look at the complex sentence. What do you think I've tried to exaggerate there? I'm just going to give you 10 seconds. So hopefully what you've seen is by making that my complex sentence and almost kind of rushing through those clauses, I'm trying to exaggerate the increased speed of Jim's walking, okay, to sort of emphasise the fact that he is in a rush to get away in case he gets caught without his coat. Right. In terms of the way you start sentences, again, this needs variety. If you start a sentence the same way over and over and over again, it becomes very dull and repetitive. So obviously, one way you can start your sentences with your nouns and noun phrases. The dog barked at the postman, seagulls flew overhead. That's one way. You've obviously got your pronouns. It was cold. He put his coat on. I put my hat on. And again, if you overuse those starts, they can be quite tricky. You can use ing starts or gerunds or however you're taught them. The muttering loudly, he huffed off. Okay, that's quite a nice way of starting to create a bit of action at the beginning. Adverbs, slowly, I looked over the fence. And again, with the ings and the adverbs there, if you put them at the end of the sentence, so he huffed off muttering loudly, you can see that by pulling muttering loudly at the beginning, you need to put the comma after it. Again, I looked over the fence slowly. Slowly, I looked over the fence. You can put the comma there. Subordinate clauses, after the fair, we spent 2 hours trying to get home. And again, exactly the same way with we spent 2 hours trying to get home after the fair. If you move that whole sort of phrase to the beginning, you need the comma after it. This is a purple task, okay, something you can do later. Try and rewrite it so that you've got a variety of sentence starts. Check that the punctuation is accurate once you've finished. It's very tempting when you rearrange things to sometimes lose the punctuation. So you've got there, I woke up and instantly shivered. I had never felt so cold. I was aware that this was not normal. I normally woke up feeling warm and toasty under my duvet. I knew that today was different as I could no longer feel my toes. I knew they were just numb with cold, so I didn't worry too much. And again, the I makes for a very dull tone. All right, so try and have a go at rewriting that, making it a bit more interesting. And if you want to, maybe try and finish off the narrative. Think about why is this character so cold? What has happened? What is different? All right, so have a go at rewriting it so you can vary your sentences. Okay, spelling and vocabulary. Obviously, this is one of the ways or one of the areas where reading is so helpful because you will come across words that you don't normally use in common conversation. And what you'll see is lots of different synonyms, so words that have related meanings to another word. So, for example, huge and massive are synonyms of big. I'm going to give you about 20 seconds. I just want you to look at this image of a haunted house, and I want you to try and come up with as many synonyms as you can for scary, okay? Because obviously, if we're writing about a haunted house, we're going to write about being scared. I want you to try and think about as many different synonyms as you can for scary, okay? 20 seconds, off you go. Okay. What you then want to do when you've kind of come up with those synonyms, particularly if there are any that you're not confident with the spelling on, is just double check them. Just double check that you've got them accurate, so that you can then revise those spellings. And also think about stealing words from your text. All of you have got writing sections of the exam after a reading section. So in your reading section, there might be some really cool words in there that you think, oh, actually, I could totally steal that. I know what that means. I can use that effectively. I'm going to steal that word. Just, use them to help you get the spelling right. And I've got the magpies there, this idea of stealing words from text. What I would say is just check for Americanisms, because some of you will have exam papers where they can use American texts. And so words like neighbour and behaviour might be spelt the American way without the U, but obviously you will need to make sure you spell it with one. Okay? So again, steal words, help get them right. And again, in terms of a revision task, you might want to think up, choose up to 10 words that you overuse in your writing. Okay, so look over the past work that you've done for your teachers, look through your exercise books, and just see if there's any words that you use a lot. Okay, that you can then try and find some synonyms that are easy to spell. So, for example, I write quite a lot of dystopian fiction, quite a lot of negative stuff, and I tend to like the word, words to do with things being evil and horrible and all the rest of it. One of my favourite words I like to use is malevolent, because actually that is spelt the way that it sounds. It's really quite sophisticated. It really, you can use it in a lot of different ways. And that's one that I tend to kind of keep in the bank for when I want to sort of show off with my writing. And it's definitely worth having. Now, I've put some suggestions there: scary, exciting, big, small, amazing. Those are 5 words that I see a lot when I'm marking work. And so if you can have a nice range of terms, nice range of synonyms for those, ones that you can spell, that you can practice using them in a variety of sentences, that's one way of maybe boosting your vocabulary. Paragraphing is the next thing that's really important. It's important in terms of structuring your piece. It's important in terms of how it should look on the page. It's important in terms of making it easier for your examiner to read, and it's important in terms of making sure it's accurate. So make sure you're really confident with how to paragraph. So the recommended sort of top tip for paragraphing, I'm sure some of you have seen this from primary school all the way up, the idea that you change a paragraph when you change topic, when you change person, either the person speaking or the description of the person or the viewpoint from that person, the time or the place. And for the highest marks, your paragraphing needs to be both accurate and deliberate. You need to be changing paragraphs for effect. And this means things like using single sentence paragraphs or sort of flashback paragraphs and sort of changing the connections between them. It's about being deliberate in your thought processes. So, for example, this is my little piece here. I'm going to read you this, and you've got 2 questions at the end. Well, you've got a question at the end there, sorry. How does the paragraphing help present the idea that the decision is difficult? Okay, so on the one hand, Carlos had the best design and the most impressive idea, but he was always so difficult to work with. It was as if he needed to have a row with everyone before he could even begin, and finding people to put up with his tantrums was getting increasingly challenging. On the other hand, finding people to work with Leo would be no problem at all. He was just such a friendly person and made every member of the team feel like they were valued and respected. Every project he had ever worked on had come in on time and under budget, but the design he had submitted this time was just, well, dull. There was no other word for it. It certainly wouldn't get us the recognition we so desperately needed. It was a tricky decision. Right, have a look at that paragraphing. What is the effect of that paragraphing? Okay, just going to give you about 10 seconds. Pause if you need more time. Okay, now hopefully what you can see is you've got sort of one decision on one side and one decision on the other. So the paragraphing has been deliberately separated to show that they are sort of 2 isolated things. There's no connection between them. And then we've got that single sentence paragraph at the end that sort of acts almost like a summary, like a sort of a dramatic final bit to it. And so you can see there that the paragraphing has been done deliberately to help exaggerate the fact that this decision is going to be hard. And the fact, it was a tricky decision makes that concept, makes that idea really stand out away from those much longer sentences and paragraphs. Right, proofreading and editing. Now this, obviously you've seen, there are mistakes in this PowerPoint that show how important that proofreading and editing process is. Now, when you check your work through, you need to really think about the fact that checking your work takes time. Okay, this isn't something that you're going to be able to do in a couple of seconds. If you read your essays and your fiction and non-fiction writing back to yourself, you need to think about taking about 2 to 3 minutes per page. So if you've written 4 pages in your fiction writing, you're going to need about 12 minutes to proofread. And you really need to think about the time it takes to do that job properly. I've had students before who can write really, really quickly. They've produced 7 or 8 pages of story, but they just haven't had the time to proofread it, and so they benefited from shortening their story, but actually giving themselves more time to read and edit. You might want to check through something else first. So on your reading and writing paper, you might want to go and quickly check through your reading section before you look again at your writing. And that's because when you read through something that you've just done, your brain will often ignore the mistakes because it knows what you're aiming for. And so doing something else and then coming back to it is a really good strategy of spotting the errors. So one of the things that I recommend to my students is giving yourself a mental walk away in the exam. Now, obviously, in the exam, you cannot get up and go for a walk and then come back and read it. Okay, that's not how it works. But you can give yourself a little mental walk away. Okay, so what I suggest to my students is they spend 10 seconds really thinking about their favourite place. Okay, and then in that favourite place, they spot their favourite animal. So I really love otters. So, I'm down by some water, I spot some otters playing around, and then I think about, right, your favourite food is there. I'm really quite fancying pizza at the moment. And so you kind of give yourself sort of 20, 30 seconds away with all your favourite things, and then go back and read your work. And it's almost like your brain has switched off from the story so that it's then checking it as if you'd walked away and come back another day. You might want to use a ruler to help keep you focused, so a ruler on the page to sort of follow your lines down so that you don't end up drifting. Because I do this all the time. When I proofread, I tend to stop at I start at the first line and go, once upon a time, and then I just skim over the main ideas. I don't actually follow it and focus properly. So using a ruler helps to control and keep me focused. And the other thing you can do is think about your weak spots beforehand. Okay, where are your areas that you often make mistakes? So, for example, for me, when I teach Romeo and Juliet, the character Mercutio, those of you that know the play, his name ends in TIO. Now, usually when I write TIO, it's going to end in an N. Words like nation, connection, TION. And so what I find is when I'm writing about Mercutio, I tend to call him Mercutian. I tend to put an N on the end. Now, I know that, which means when I go back and check my work, I always look for his name to make sure I haven't got N's on the end. If you know, I'm also really notorious for writing too quickly and missing out words. And so what I tend to do is read back as if I'm on stage, so that I can spot any places that are missing words. So reading aloud in your head is a skill that you need to sort of build up. But I like to pretend I'm on stage reading out because then I notice where I've missed things, particularly missed punctuation. Editing is a messy business. Now, this is an example of my creative writing. This is something I've written. You can see there's scribbles and marks all over it. Don't be afraid of that. Okay, I know that there's a bit of a temptation when you're writing in the exam to try and make everything perfect first off, but it's never going to be, and your examiner doesn't worry about that. You just need to make sure that your examiner can read what you've written. I mean, you can see that my handwriting's not great, but don't be too worried about the fact that it's messy. Right, that's my timer about to go, but we've nearly finished. So this bit here, I've zoomed in on some of these bits. This is a bit of an editing as I go. Okay, so I'd started a sentence, I changed my mind about it, I just scribbled it off and started again. In the same way as we kind of false start when we speak. That's also okay. You just need to make sure that it still connects. So obviously, you can see I've scribbled out a minute. It would still link to the clause beforehand. The two changes you can see here were a result of proofreading. The first, I'd simply missed out letters of writing incapable. So you can see there I've written INCAPLE, incapable. This happens when I'm writing too quickly, all right? And it happens to everybody. So I've spotted that when I've gone back through and I've scribbled it out and written incapable above the start. The reason I've scribbled it out and written above is because trying to add the extra letters in would have made it unreadable. So I've just scribbled it out and started again. The second error, so the dripping of bit that I've added in, I wanted to develop the image and I wanted to add extra words. What I probably should have done is done that little upside down V to show where the bit was going in, just to make it clearer. Okay, so those two bits there. This one is a strategy I use all the time if I get stuck on a word. Okay, so I put a line to come back to it in a minute. So I could still say these minutes, 10:05 eternity passes, you know, it would still work without that expanded noun phrase, but I wanted something in there and I couldn't remember the word. I just couldn't. It means that I can then go back and spot those bits and upgrade it if I need to, or put the word in. What I would say is in an exam, use a simple word and then go back and upgrade later. Okay. So the next one, as I was going, I realised I should have done a new paragraph. I changed time, but I was so in the zone of writing, I'd sort of missed that. But I edited it as I was going along, scribbled it out and started again. If I'd missed it, I could have used those 2 forward slashes when I read back through my work to show that I meant to put a paragraph there. And again, your examiner will accept that. So in terms of a review, make sure you know how to use a range of punctuation accurately, practice regularly, various sentence structures and starts, work on your vocabulary, practice paragraphing, develop your editing strategies, and always leave time to check your work. Those are the things that you really need to think about. Okay. Now, there are loads of things out there for you to help practice punctuation, loads of online quizzes, loads of activities that you can do to practice, and I'm sure your teachers can direct you to some that they think will be really suitable. The other thing, obviously, that I haven't put on here that you can do that's going to really help is reading, because that way you can pick up new vocabulary, new styles of writing, new ideas that will help improve your work. Those are the things we've gone through. Like I said, very short glossary today, only 5 things on it. But hopefully you'll put that with the other glossaries from the other lessons, and that will give you a really nice bank of terminology, sort of technical know-how that will stand you in good stead for your exams. If you do have any feedback, please send it. The QR code is there, or the form is on the links below. And that's it. That's the last lesson in this series. So that's the 6 lessons there. I really hope you've benefited from them. I'm hoping to get a new series out soon. But like I said, any feedback from anything you want would be great. I'm wishing you all the very best for the future. I hope that you have a restful summer holiday. I know that you've been working really hard. And I wish you all the best. Take care. See you soon. Bye.